I just thought, since this is the Friday after Thanksgiving, almost everyone is home, eating, drinking, enjoying time with family, enjoy, enjoying time with family, that I would give you an opportunity to slip away for an hour or so for some time alone. You're welcome. This is another installment of Drinking About Design. This special episode features Butler Armsden leadership team of Glenda, Flaim, and Federico Engel. And we're talking about some really obscure topics. Drinking while we do it, and I hope you enjoy it. Fernando is sharing stories about his homeland, Argentina, as well as the Capanopolis and Francisco Salamone. And Glenda will be sharing her thoughts on Venetian chimneys. Never heard of Venetian chimneys? Well, it's a story about invention. As the proverb goes, necessity is the mother of invention. And that perfectly describes Venetian chimneys. Think about fire suppression in overcrowded cities, adding ornate design. Pretty cool, right? Now date them back to the 13th century. Ideas in technological spark arresting and fire suppression. We're going to get right to this, and a special thanks to Glenda and Federico from Butler Armsden for joining me, and for my incredible partner sponsors, Pacific Sales, Thermosol, TimberTech, Monogram, and Design Hardware for making it possible and allowing me to share these stories with you. With that, I give you another installation of Drinking About Design. This is the third installment of Drinking About Design. And I got to tell you, I should have been doing this years ago, years ago. So we will start with, and by the way, I've got the whole, by the time folks start hearing what we're talking about now, they've already heard the preamble. And so they know exactly where we're going. And I was going to ask first and foremost what everybody's drinking. And Federico, it looked like water there. I'm just going to say, I'm not calling you out. I'm just going to say.
I think you caught me early on, Josh, and I am double fisting for everybody to know. So my drink of choice, since I you chose some fascinating topics for me, Josh, but they relate to kind of my place of origin, which is Argentina. And I was mentioning to Glenda when we were comparing notes that Argentina has amazing things all the way around, but they're not the best known for their spirits. They have a wonderful Malbec, but I thought it was here in the Pacific or on the Pacific coast, so it was a little early for a Malbec. So I went with kind of the cocktail of choice there, which is Fernet and Coca-Cola, or as they pronounce it in Buenos Aires, Fernet y Coca-Cola.
Okay, I love that. Now, wait a minute. So, Fernando, did you grew up in Argentina?
Uh, I'll keep that maybe to the 5 or 10 second story. I actually came to the U.S. when I was almost 5 years old, Rockville, Maryland, and we moved back and forth between Maryland and Buenos Aires for about I think 7 years, kind of two-year stints in each place before we landed permanently here in the Bay Area. So um, hopefully you won't make me speak a lot of Spanish. We'll stick to English, which is my better language.
Okay, perfect, perfect. I love that. And Glenda, so what are you drinking, and what's your story?
Well, my story is I did grow up in Italy and I moved actually here, well, now 40 years ago. But, you know, I think at this point I still have spent more time in Italy than here, but just a little bit. I am drinking basil gimlet, and one because I love gin that not that long ago I discovered actually was invented in Italy by some monks. Who knew? And then basil because basilico. I'm Italian. I love it, and I also love the summer, so I'm kind of hanging on to the summer vibe as long as I can, even though it's November now.
Yeah, it's funny being from LA and living in Oklahoma. Very interesting because apparently now here in Oklahoma, we just go from summer straight to winter. Apparently that's how things go. And then
No
apparently it'll go
shoulder
from,
season.
So you got to hold on to that summer as long as possible, I bet. Yeah.
I know. No, it's true. Well, actually, it's funny because fall and spring for the past 2 years have just been amazing. But this year's been a little different. It has gone from summer, one day it's 80 and the next day it was 30. So it was crazy.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but we'll enjoy while we have it. So in honor of this conversation, I am going with I found an Italian table wine, an Italian red. It's a table wine. It is a 2021, so it's not aged at all. But I will tell you, it's not bad. It's not bad. So I figured I would go in the spirit.
Yes.
Now Argentina has great wine as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great wine.
Exactly. Yeah, we are known for our Malbecs, which is a strong red. You have to eat it with a bife de chorizo, which is the big steaks, and perfect pairing. Maybe I try to reserve that more for the weekends, if possible. But if
Fair enough.
you make it to Argentina, there's a kind of the wine region there, very similar to kind of our Napa Valley here in the U.S. is
Mendoza.
What's that?
Mendoza, no?
Oh, there you go, Glenda. Yeah, Mendoza. And one of my aunts is a sommelier in a winery there. So just I'm an Argentine ambassador as well as an architect. So anytime somebody needs information on Argentina, I hope I'm the first person that they call.
I love that. And it's funny too, because as a huge soccer fan, I would actually love one day to go to Argentina and to see a match there. I think that would be to see the national team play. I think that would just be amazing.
I completely agree. We'll do it together. Maybe we'll finish the podcast and then we'll make plans for the travel. Although now that Messi's playing with in Florida, maybe we could also see a little Argentine soccer here in the US.
Oh, it's fantastic. Okay, so I love it. So Glenda, you're in LA, and Federico, you're both in San Francisco. Okay, mm-hmm. So Glenda, you grew up in LA, or not grew up, but you've been there for a number of years. And then, okay, how did you both wind up together as the firm developed?
You go, Federico.
Oh. I did not prep for this story, Josh.
You don't know the origin story of the firm?
Absolutely. But you gave me homework. You're jumping ahead of the homework. So this feels like a pop quiz of the kind of the Zoom story. So kind of let me start with kind of a little bit about our firm. So our firm was founded by husband and wife, Louis Butler and Catherine Armsden, 35 years ago. And we do, for the most part, I would say kind of amazing single family residential work throughout the Bay Area and beyond, especially here in San Francisco, a lot of work in San Francisco. And the firm really was led by our founder, Louis Butler. And he hired me almost 20 years ago, 20 years next June. And we work kind of collaboratively and together in an office of 25 very talented architects and designers, and that's how I found myself here. And then Glenda.
Yeah, I mean, I think Federico and I Federico started in June. I started in November of the same year, so very, very few months apart. So we have worked together almost 20 years. And, as Federico was mentioning, the firm was led by Louis until he passed away in 2020. And, basically asked Federico, myself, and Chandra to lead the firm for the next generation. So that's where we are.
What is, it's interesting. I don't often get to ask about this, but what does that mean to transfer? It's, you never really own anything, right? Because due to the fragile and temporary nature of life, you never get to keep anything. But if you do it right, you get to transition and transfer, as you had mentioned, um, principles and ideas in a firm from one generation to the next. And it's interesting because, you know, I've worked with and do work with a lot of companies that are multi-generational family-owned businesses, but I always find it interesting when it's not a family owned and operated, because there's almost this inextricable connection, right, that you have with family. Like, it's family, so we own it. But it's really interesting when it's not the family you're born to, but it's the family you choose, that you can transition from one generation to the next. What does that mean for a firm like yours, with so many creatives and such a rich history of work? When you think about that and think of yourselves as caretakers, and custodians of the firm, what does that mean, and how does that affect your work? And does, in the 20 years that you've been doing this, does that still provide you the opportunity to be as creative as you might want to be, and to do the types of projects that you want to do?
I will say, I'll take this one since I asked Federico to go first the last time.
It is quite a question, though, where it's going to take a little while to kind of
I know, I
all of
agree.
that. So I think between the two of us, we might have a shot at it.
It might take a while, exactly, and a few tries, multiple part questions. I mean, I think Federico mentioned something about, like, you know, the firm being, funded about 35 years ago, and being kind of, you know, well known in the Bay Area and in San Francisco in particular. And I think for us was kind of like maintaining that legacy that, you know, has been created in this past, 30 plus years, but also ushering kind of the, the next generation. And so sometimes we do work for, the sons and the daughters of our original clients. Sometimes we remodel the houses of our existing clients, because, the kids that, when we did the first remodel, were going to kindergarten or were just born, are now gone to college. So it's an interesting, is both, maintaining that connection, but also recreating that connection for, like, the new context, the new reality that we are experiencing, like, now versus what it was like in the 2000s, or even before that in the 1990s. So, for example, we are working right now in a project that was a ground up house in San Francisco, that for San Francisco is always something special, because everything that is 50 years or older is actually historical in San Francisco. So basically now everything from, the 70s is historical. So to be able to demolish something and build something, from scratch is always an accomplishment. So this house was basically designed in 2001, built in 2001, and won actually an AIA award at the time. But it was designed for a single man, and so it was very specific. It had, a primary suite, and then it had one guest bedroom, and that was it, even though the house is relatively large. And then it was actually purchased by this new family, and they were like, well, it's two of us, plus we have two kids, plus we have a dog. And the house, even though they loved the house, they actually bought the house off the market. It was not even for sale. So they clearly loved the house, but the house was not designed for them. It was very much designed for this particular person. So reimagining that, the same way we kind of reimagine the company, is kind of always an interesting, challenge, and something that inspires, and someone that keeps us thinking about the design, but also like thinking about the business as a kind of a design.
And I think that that's actually like the perfect jumping off point for what we're doing today. This idea, this concept, drinking about design, I just wanted to be able to have late afternoon conversations with creatives I admire, with a beverage or two, to add as a little social lubricant, to get into the, in the spirit of Anthony Bourdain, or the spirit of Dinner for Five, or the spirit of these shows. Anthony Bourdain really is the one that I look at, and it's like I just love being able to go places and tell stories about remarkable things from seemingly ordinary people who were just, they live so differently. And when I first learned about the opportunity to speak with you both, it was like, wow, okay, so Federico's Argentinian and Glenda's Italian, and I have some thoughts, not about that, not about your origin, but I have some thoughts, because whenever I hear things like that, I view that as an opportunity to just start digging and to find things. So Federico, you have two topics here. So I'm going to start with you. And the first one I wanted to talk about is Campanopolis.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just so wonderful and so wacky and so weird and whimsical. And I will tell you that I am a huge fan of American roadside attractions. Even not roadside per se, but like the Brown Derby and the Googies in LA and surrounding areas. But also, being from LA, road trips when I was growing up was a huge part of what we did. So, going to the Winchester Mystery House, right? Or going to the Madonna Inn, or going someplace just to see what someone thought was interesting, or the Winchester Mystery House at the time, where she just felt like she had to keep building or she was going to die, because that's what what she was told by a fortune teller. It was like, okay, I get it, but that's just so crazy. So Campanopolis is in the suburbs of Buenos Aires. Had you heard about that? You've heard about that before. Have you ever been?
So great introduction, Josh. And as all things Argentine, I start my research with my parents, who are true kind of Argentines, kind of through and through. They've been here in California with me for the last 30 years, but they're the real Argentines, and even they had not heard about it.
Okay.
So I had not heard about it either, but I think your introduction was perfect. I think as an architect, that you gave me a homework assignment, and I was a little bit short of time in doing a very in-depth research assignment. I would have loved to, because the more I got into it, the subject, the more fascinating it was. But before, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to wing this, and I'm going to mention all the precedents you just mentioned: the Madonna Inn, the Winchester Mystery House. I had two more on the list, Josh, to make you show you that I was thinking. It's the Watts Towers in Southern California and LA as well. Kind of built by an individual over the course of 20 years. Nobody really knows his reasoning for it. He kind of just built it, and it's an amazing thing, and it's become a state park and kind of this pilgrimage site. And then the other one, kind of at a different level, but I went for the first time to Hearst Castle earlier last year, and with Randolph Hearst, kind of very similar. Obviously, he hired a very talented architect with Julia Morgan for that. And it was kind of his passion over the course of 20, 30 years to develop this hillside monument for himself, his friends, So kind of that's kind of the context I came to this project and to this information with. And I thought of it in terms of kind of approaching it the way we approach architecture. When we're limited in time, we use our kind of leverage our experience. And I thought this Campanopolis, this development, which started in 1976 by a gentleman who was a very wealthy gentleman, developed a series of supermarkets, and then found out that he had cancer, possibly terminal cancer, and just made a complete pivot in his life. So there's kind of two stories here. One's the story of this man, and I'm going to look up for his name real quick.
Alberto Campana.
Antonio Campana, and that's why
Alberto.
Yeah. Oh, there were two versions. One was Antonio, one was Alberto.
Oh, really?
Yes, depending on what articles you looked at, there were two versions. But there's no denying that the town that he created is Campanopolis. So there's two stories. There's the story about the individual who's fascinating. Again, he kind of pivoted at the age of 50, thinking he had little time to live, ended up spending 20 years of his life developing this fairy tale kind of wonderland, Hearst Castle-ish town, about 35 kilometers out of Buenos Aires, so not too far. And it was never inhabited. And it's become kind of this amazing tourist attraction, place to host events, to do photo shoots. So I think the story of what he accomplished, I think it's super unique. And I think the sub story there is he had no architectural training, no design training. Again, he was a supermarket guy, and just said, hey, maybe in my remaining time, this is what I want to do. So I think that's a good reminder to all of us that maybe it's never too late to pivot and really find your passion. I feel fortunate enough to have found my passion pretty early on. So I'm hoping I don't have to pivot. I hope I have another 20 years, 25, 30, keep going years to do this. But I thought that was amazing. There's also kind of a very interesting and rich story about the land and what we call the context. And I think of architectural projects for me always kind of in that twofold. There's the context, the siting, what you're working with, the history of the property, and then there's the unique story of the individual as well. So those two stories I think kind of mesh perfectly in this one. And I'm going to take a quick sip here. Real quick, the history of land, and I have to start in the 1800s real quick, but I'm going to keep it to about another 5 or 10 seconds. So this is in the province of Buenos Aires, which is called the Pampas, which is amazing kind of flat grassland, and it's been kind of an economy of cattle and cows for centuries, and that's kind of what this land really looked like until the turn of the century. Then it was dredged, and just to complete the story on the Pampas, it's very low lying. It's next to the Rio de la Plata, which we take credit for as the widest river in the world. I'm going to sprinkle some Argentine fascinating history as we go through here. So our Argentines are very proud people. So they're going to talk about their beef. They're going to talk about their Malbec. They're going to talk about their widest river in the world. So anyways, that's the Pampa. But in general, it's not the the most desirable land. But this gentleman bought it in 1976, and it had already been scarred quite a bit. The land had been used again for cattle for a long time. Then it was actually dredged to build the international airport, which is just a few kilometers away. So if you fly into Buenos Aires, most likely you're going to fly into that airport, Ezeiza. And then after it was dredged, and again, it's very low lying, so prone to flooding. And it was actually used as a dump site, so it was full of kind of construction debris. And he bought it and kind of turned it, so he took potentially kind of a piece of land that was really, kind of tortured and really developed something great. So I think the story out of that too is that, we all have the capacity to kind of improve our environment and improve the environment for others too.
What an interesting story, right? And also it's interesting too, like old doors from the Palermo Hippodrome, right? Vintage leather seats were sourced from an old theater. Old coins line the walls in one building. I mean, this is really, it is bric-a-brac meets whimsical Alice in Wonderland kind of stuff, right? And what's interesting, and I was thinking about this when Glenda mentioned that in San Francisco, anything over 50 years old is considered historical. I have very strong opinions on this, and I feel like you might as well. So I'm going to throw this out there. I work with a number of architects who feel very strongly about historical preservation. Like I mentioned, I love the Googies in LA. Some of these, like the Standard Oil gas station that's by, I think, La Brea in LA. Some of the others, there's one in Beverly Hills. There's all of the Norms restaurants, which are just so cool. I love looking at them. I love mid-century modern.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that just because something's old doesn't make it historically relevant. And I did a 2-episode piece last year on the destruction of 1001 North Roxbury, which is a home in Beverly Hills with just star-studded history. Absolutely beautiful. It was up to date. It had been published in AD and Lux magazine, and it was bought for $49 million to tear it down and to build something new. And I'm sure that what they build is going to be luxurious. It's going to be amazing. And I said that I don't feel any loss because I don't live in Beverly Hills. I didn't walk my dogs past 1001 North Roxbury every day. It wasn't my neighborhood. I didn't experience it. So I don't feel that sense of loss from its destruction. At the same time, something like a Brown Derby, which isn't there anymore, something like this, like it makes me feel like I love that this exists. And I'm wondering if for an architect like you, does that serve as inspiration?
I love that it exists as well. I think the inspiration I find is not in the form per se, just because I think that it's kind of this fantasy world, little medieval village that he created. So I think it's fascinating. I'd love to go visit. But the inspiration is not the form. I think the inspiration is, again, what you could do maybe with a piece of land, a property that is, has kind of fallen by the wayside, and really make something magical out of it. I think the story is, or for me, the inspiration, and not only as an architect, but just as a person, that you can if you're passionate and hardworking, and apparently this person, what do we call him? Antonio?
Alberto.
Alberto, one or the two, kind of part of the story was that he was hands-on at the site, kind of a workaholic for 20 years. And I love for me, kind of passion and work ethic kind of lead to success, whether you're an architect, whether you're building a medieval village. I think those are a couple ingredients for success, and so that's where I find inspiration.
It's also sorry, it's also interesting because you mentioned the fact that it was never inhabited, right? So it kind of, in a way, it's almost more of a piece of art than architecture. It's almost a piece of art that you experience three-dimensionally than an architecture, because the architecture by definition is something that you either inhabited or use as for public functions or kind of something like that. So it's kind of interesting of when these two things kind of merge, right? Because you can think of even like the crazy construction of like Gaudi in Barcelona, right, where it has this very whimsical, very kind of interesting, but in a way he was able to maintain that connection of like it being used as architecture. So all his houses, and of course the Sagrada Familia, but like, so in a way this one is kind of even more abstract than those other whimsical or Hearst Castle that we talked about earlier, where it was actually used as a residence.
I love that you mentioned Sagrada Familia, because if either of you were from Spain, that's what I would have gone towards. And the park that Antonio Gaudi designed.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you want to just talk about whimsical and wild, and it was more instinct than thought process. I have no other way to describe that. But it's interesting because when I was looking at the Campanopolis and I'm looking at these curved spires leading from the top of the house, one of the houses, and just watching, looking at all of these crazy angles and what was done with it, that led me to Glenda, for you, talking about, that's what got me thinking about, that's how I found the Venetian chimneys, and I had never heard of them before, and I've not been to Italy.
Oh wow!
It's on a list. I've been a lot of places. It's on a list. I've just never had the time to go. Raising kids or creating a business or coaching soccer or any number of things.
Or drinking by design.
Yeah, exactly. So it led me down this path, and I feel like this idea of the Venetian chimney is in and of itself this whimsical artistic idea, but it's also highly functional, highly necessary, and it took the creative mind of creatives like architects and designers to craft an idea so that the entire cities don't burn down, right?
Yes. So in a way, it's funny that you made that connection, right? Because they're definitely a feature of the of the skyline of Venice. Like I don't know that a lot of people mention them, but they are absolutely there. They're present even nowadays, where people don't heat their houses with fireplaces or cook like on a kind of on a on a stove, on a wood burning stove in the kitchen. But so the shape are highly visible, and they're kind of like these very interesting, very unique ones. But they, as you said, they're like highly functional, and they really were. They were developed because of the specific, kind of constraints of Venice. One being kind of a very, very densely inhabited and very densely built part, because Venice was built over 116 islands, and all the houses are one next to the other. There are very, very few freestanding buildings. And the other part that is very interesting is that they're all different heights, the buildings. So you can have a very tall one next to one that, might be like 2-story lower. And they're also oriented in very different way. There's no grid, right, compared to every other city. So all of these kind of these characteristics that were kind of given from the topography of the place, plus the fact that it's on a lagoon, so you kind of have to deal with the salt air, and the fact that you have to deal with the fog, kind of created this kind of context of like, okay, problematic, a problem that really needed to be solved. And then the other part is that differently from a lot of other building in Italy, is that actually the building in Venice, especially the roof, floors, and all the interior walls were actually built in wood, because of the weight of the building, and because it's basically built on what it is, a lagoon, like a swamp. They needed to adapt so be kind of flexible enough to adapt, and the second, not be too heavy. So that also, that had they were very highly specifically designed with a very different way from everywhere else in Italy. But that led to the fact that you have this building that are a majority of them, they're built in, the majority of the building material is wood, that they're all next to each other. So fires were a huge, huge, huge problem. And they still are a huge problem. Like, when I was living there in 1996, like, one of the most famous theater in the world, the Venetian, burned down to the ground in like less than an hour. So, that just kind of gives you the idea of like how big of a problem that was and still is. So they basically invented this special chimney that in the most common one is basically you have the flue, and then the part that is the kind of the interesting and where they became really creative is this upside down bell top that is called castello, that it means like a castle. So that's kind of even that word will kind of give you an idea of what they look like. And it's basically an ingenious way of how to trap sparks and how to cool down basically the hot fumes that were coming out from the houses, and then to really avoid that to spark on nearby roofs, and therefore kind of have fire spreads to other houses. So it's kind of an interesting, there's many paintings that depicts like all the chimneys of Venice, just because they are much higher. They're very kind of an architectural element, and they became over time like an architectural element. So like, they had like super famous painters decorate them, so they became kind of really a feature. Like Titian painted them, Giorgione painted them, Bellini painted them. So they're kind of like they became, besides the facade and the facade on the water from the palaces, but they were these kind of very specific elements that became really distinctive, and people use them to kind of show their wealth and their artistic tendencies. And then it was interesting because kind of over time they also the bell, their upside down bell was kind of like that. By the way, it's kind of funny because bell in Italian is campana, that is also the name of the guy. So it's all tied together. So then over time, as the kind of architectural styles of the house changes, then they have some of them that are shaped as a trident, and some of them that are shaped as a cuboid, and so there's kind of like it changed. But I would say that if you close your eyes and you think of Venice, the upside down bell is kind of like really what sticks out, and what you remember and what you think of as the chimney.
And what's so amazing about this is, Venice is just I mean, talk about a city where you just shouldn't live, right? It's a sinking swamp and it's fire laden. I mean, it's fire prone and you've got all these issues, but it's beautiful and it's historical. And it's because it's historical, it's, you know, you can tell that they are going to do, the Italians, the Venetians are going to do everything they can to preserve Venice as long as possible. And by the way, you can't fight Mother Nature. You can battle for a while, but ultimately, but at the same time, it's the creativity that goes into this. Were it not for ideas of the Campanopolis and this whimsical, like, I'm just going to do something whimsical and silly, but out of that comes these real ideas, and not that the two are connected, but the idea of the Venetian chimneys were born out of an idea. And listen, I'm sure that there could have been someone of an engineering mind, more mathematical than creative, who could have come up with a, maybe it's the upside down bell, and just that's the thing you see on every home, but that wasn't it. Then it became an artistic endeavor. Then it became the science and technology works. Now, how creative can we be with it? Right. And I love that because, in my opinion, designers and architects as futurists, because you have to be, but it doesn't mean that you have to do the same thing over and over and over again just because it works. There has to be this idea of crafting something different and an artistic nature to what you do. So that's when, and Federico, back to you, that's when I found Francisco Salamone. I pronounce that right?
That's correct. Yeah. And actually, it all comes around because he was born in Italy, in Sicily, and then emigrated to Argentina. Apparently, when he was kind of a young boy. So again, a nice connection here.
So, and I was reading an article about him, and it said that, just prolific. Between 1936 and 1940, he completed more than 60 projects, 60 works. And what I love about his work, and I'm excited for you to tell me the story. Tell me what you've learned about Francisco. But what I love about his work is that it's an international style. It is brutalist. It is modern, and it's meaningful. It's well thought out. It's very much. It's funny. He's similar. He was similar to Frank Lloyd Wright in many ways that I've seen, because I'm looking at a sofa at La Prida Town Hall with a built-in wooden ashtray, which just seems like a terrible idea. But looking at this, but looking at this sofa in this style, where he's building in furniture and it's just it's amazing. And prior to sort of walking down this path, I had never heard his name before. It's crazy to me.
Fascinating story, and amazing introduction too. And again, starting with my parents, even my parents hadn't heard about him. So it was an interesting kind of research assignment for all of us. But I agree. I think the things that stood out, Josh, were just incredibly prolific over this 4-year period from 1936 to 1940, where he built apparently 60 kind of municipal buildings, or designed 60 municipal buildings. And as you said, he not only designed the buildings, but he designed the furniture, he designed the lighting, kind of very much kind of along the lines of the Frank Lloyd Wright approach, where design is, holistic. And we like to do that as well in our projects, because just kind of the chairs, and we don't design very many ashtrays nowadays, but maybe there was some design logic to that ashtray that made it intentional in terms of how it fit within the whole of the building. And I completely agree. I found that fascinating. His architecture visually, we were talking about kind of inspirational architecture, and there's so many ways to be inspired about architecture and design. Sometimes it's visually, sometimes there's more of a story. Very similar to art. Sometimes you can be, I think, captivated just visually by a piece of art, and sometimes you need to learn a little bit more about the narrative, about the story, about the artist, or what about the time of the art piece. I think art and architecture often tell us about time and place. This is architecture that's, as you said, it's brutalist, it's modern. It was described as Art Deco, and also kind of an Italian futurism. It has a real power to it. So visually very inspiring, but also the story behind it, I thought was really interesting as well. Because I've always been fascinated by this Art Deco style, which was kind of a worldwide phenomenon, and kind of starting in the late 1920s, and it really kind of had a short life. And I was in New York recently, and the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building are real standouts of that Art Deco style for me. And in some ways, they're timeless. And I wonder if the Art Deco style just kind of lost. It became less popular. And because it is such a strong style that, it had kind of a short life. And we often think of architecture, the architecture that stands the test of time, kind of the timeless architecture. And I wonder if that is why, after, again, having such a prolific career over the span of 4 years, why he suddenly, just kind of faded into history. Apparently he kind of died, or passed away in the late 50s, kind of as an unknown architect. And I also love the fact that he's kind of being rediscovered nowadays too.
Is he?
Well, obviously through this podcast, and I did read that they did have, I think the problem for him is that his work, other than the physical work that, and he primarily kind of specialized in civic buildings. So he did schools, he did cemeteries, and kind of this city halls. And then the fourth one is kind of a specialty architecture for slaughterhouses.
I was just going to mention that. Like, how weird is that?
It's fascinating. You probably only find that in maybe Brazil, in Buenos Aires, in the province of Buenos Aires, in certain areas where they have a lot of cattle, and every day or every weekend it's bringing in the cattle for harvest, and it becomes a celebration. It's a combination of kind of market, slaughterhouse, maybe a good spot for some parrilla as well. So that just by itself, kind of that architecture probably doesn't have a function anymore, which is also just a fascinating thing by itself too.
Yeah, I was looking at the space age slaughterhouse at Guamini. Guamini, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, a lot of these names for the little towns that he built, and that's a fascinating story too, are either kind of indigenous names or kind of European names of the call them colonists that kind of established outposts throughout the province of Buenos Aires.
One of my favorite descriptions of him also came out of this article, which, so quoting, Salamone is said to have drunk copious amounts of coffee and smoked up to 100 cigarettes a day, leading to serious health complications in later life, including diabetes and soaring blood pressure, which obviously, but then what's so interesting about it is, like you had mentioned, a political movement. So his guy in office that was responsible for building all of this civic infrastructure is out of office now, and with him all of the commissions for these new buildings, and then he kind of just dies in obscurity in 1959.
Exactly. No, it brings into a question, a couple things. Definitely the underlining story here are the politics of Argentina in the 1930s, which have followed kind of Argentina throughout its history. That's probably another podcast, not this podcast. You might want my parents for that one. They'll have some strong feelings. But no, absolutely. It brings into kind of a spotlight the importance of patrons for architects in terms of, you did have the governor of the province of Buenos Aires, as the patron, and with an agenda of building, putting his stamp on his, kind of his legacy as a politician in a way, and having the financing and the government. It was a military dictatorship at the time. So kind of if you had the right connections, things really could happen and can happen quickly. So I think all those ingredients were in place for Francisco Salamante, and again, out of I might disagree with the politics and the ingredients that allowed for this prolific display of architecture, but and also kind of in that story there is kind of the I think and it brings me back kind of into question the Art Deco movement. And, I think some of this architecture, whether you want to call it Art Deco or Italian futurist, was tied into the political ideology of that time and the place. So I think as, the military dictatorships kind of came and went, obviously, so did Francisco Salamante, but maybe also did the kind of the recognition of these pieces. And then again, I appreciate that, trying to do some quick math, 80 years later, kind of after this movement, we're able to appreciate the buildings for the architecture and the design, and maybe have been able to separate ourselves a little bit without losing the value of that story. Being able to appreciate the architecture for what it is, and not what it was intended necessarily as this ideology back in 1936 and 1940.
Well, what's interesting too, and let's just bring this home, right? So being a native Angelino from California, I love what Los Angeles represents from a historical standpoint, where creatives would come to California and try something, and then if it didn't work, even art, not just fine artists, but architects as well would try something, they'd build something, and then it would be terrible, and then they'd tear it down and start again, or it would be amazing, but it would burn down, and out of that you get the Neutra VDL house, which is extraordinary, not perfect, but extraordinary, and really a testament to the time at which it was built. Then I moved to Tulsa, where Federico, if you want to talk about Art Deco, you need to come visit Tulsa, because Tulsa was started when the Glen Pools hit. All of these oil men came from New York City and surrounding, and they built the city, which was just pasture land, right? So they built this entire city as a little miniature New York, a little miniature Philadelphia, with a grid, with, I mean, the the properties, the projects rather, the projects were extraordinary. The Mayo Hotel, which has been refurbished, amazing, and you have other um, projects like that. But back to San Francisco, what would San Francisco be without some of that distinct architecture? And I think that one could also say that the architecture of San Francisco and the Bay Area as a whole was crafted out of political and social ideology as well, which is really interesting. If you take personality and social collective personality, and you look at architecture, you can almost tell the story of the geographic area in which you are, whether it's the Venetian chimneys or this. I just find that fascinating. And for architects, that must, again, it comes back to inspiration, because at the end of the day, you're creatives. And I have never met, I could be wrong, but I have never met a creative that could do what they do without external forms of inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, when
Absolutely.
you look at what predecessors like these have done before, it's not to say, hey, we're going to go back to roadside attractions and whimsical architecture, because I can guarantee that the people of San Francisco will not tolerate that at this point at this point in time. But has San Francisco become too sophisticated, or is there still personality to be had in architecture? Is there still fun, whimsical frivolity to be had? Because at the end of the day, for me, when I look at these three stories that we talked about today, you have to have a certain, I don't know, is it bravery? Is it bravery?
Yes, that is certainly an ingredient to these, to designing something that I think kind of is either unique or interesting. Definitely bravery. I think a lot of ingredients, and we could go through kind of the list. But I love also the fact, going back to the Venetian chimney, that that starts as kind of a very kind of practical vernacular type of solution, in terms of we need to stop fire, and we need to protect the sparks and the temperature of the fumes coming out. And it's kind of elevated, kind of the vernacular requirement is kind of elevated through kind of thoughtful design. And it's also, I think, kind of the problem where I'm trying to tie it back into San Francisco, because that's a very good question, Josh, in terms of what is, where does San Francisco stand in here? And it's a question we deal with on a daily basis, in terms of, what is historic, what merits kind of saving, what should be changed, how do we continue to, a city has to be kind of a living thing. It can't just be a stale thing, unless you're Venice to a certain extent. But there's so much history, there's so much beauty in Venice that, that's almost kind of a standalone thing. But San Francisco is a little bit different. It has history. It has eras of architecture from Victorians being the most kind of well-known. And there's some beautiful Victorians that really deserve to be saved. There's some gorgeous, we have kind of our own group of amazing mid-century architects from, the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Bill Worcester or William Worcester being one of them. And we've done a few renovations of his homes. And maybe in a way, kind of thinking about the way we approach those projects is the way, you have to approach the city, San Francisco as a whole, in terms of, we really try to understand what Bill or William Worcester was trying to accomplish, in his home 50, 60, 70 years ago. You have to start with that story and that understanding and seeing if it still fits, if it's still appropriate for today, for our clients. And in a way, I think, if you think of San Francisco that way, I think there's a lot of opportunity where it's certainly not a perfect city. So we could take kind of a lot of those pieces, a lot of those areas, and really develop them in kind of creative ways for a long time to come.
In closing, I'm just curious. Do you have any, Glenda, Federico, do you have any takeaways from this? Like, not that you're going to try to work a Venetian chimney into your next project, but I'm just curious if there are any modern lessons to be learned from these three stories.
Well, I think we kind of like talked on and off throughout the whole part, but for me, and Federico already mentioned, but in the case of chimney, the Venetian chimney is something that is really, how can you take something that is, a functional problem? Like, you're like, how are you gonna, not burn down the houses around you? And how are you gonna basically, get the smoke out of your house? And, that sounds like pretty up there with like waterproofing, right? But how do you take a problem that's a truly functional problem, and you actually make something that is beautiful and adds not only beautiful in his own as his own object, but actually how it adds to the rest of the landscape, right? Because it becomes these really kind of characteristic elements of a city, like in Venice. And then for the other two examples, I think when you talk about like, being very whimsical, is like not taking yourself too seriously. I think you always want to strive for excellence. You always want to be really considerate of what you're doing, because, building are sort of a permanent, especially in the fast moving era that we live in, they are permanent. So there is that aspect that you should take seriously, but within that, how can you just keep that whimsical and not taking yourself too seriously?
I think what's interesting, just in closing, and that's one of the things that I'm so excited about, because I mean, look, let's just seriously and honestly for a moment, we have serious problems right now. Something that I've been talking a great deal about is this idea of how design can make, or through design rather, how one makes homes safer, how you can protect yourself from crime, how you can be safer in your home, how, at first it was air and water quality and noise abatement, especially when people are working from home while everyone was working from home. Mm-hmm. And architects and designers are the ones that solve those problems. Pandemic, keeping germs out of the home architects and designers were the ones that sort of addressed those problems. Now you've got shrink and theft in retail environments. It will be designers and architects that solve the problem, because ultimately just putting everything behind lock and key isn't a solution. It's a temporary fix. It's a Band-Aid. But ultimately, it's going to be designers and architects who figure out how to solve those problems. Same with safety and security. You know, I have family just on the southern side of the Lebanon border, and every home in Israel has a safe room. They have bomb shelters in every parking lot. These are things that we haven't really dealt with. But you know, going from whimsical to serious issues, it's because of things like that. It's because of projects like these. It's because of ideas like these that actually solve problems, that make their way into both the vernacular and to the finished product. So for that, you know, that's why I think for me, these conversations like this one are just so fun. And I cannot thank you both enough for taking the time to have a drink or two with me and talk through this.
Well, thank you, and salute.
Yeah, same. Thank you very much, Josh.
That was so much fun. Thank you, Federico. Thank you, Glenda. So appreciate the storytelling and the time, and for drinking with me. Thank you to my partner sponsors, Thermosol, TimberTech, Pacific Sales, Monogram, and Design Hardware for your continued support. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join me for these conversations. This was fun, right? There are more episodes of Drinking About Design in 2025. So subscribe to the podcast and get every episode brand new right to your feed as soon as it's published. So now you've had a chance to decompress, relax, still Thanksgiving, go be with the family. And until next week, happy Thanksgiving, be well, and take today first.